Pranam, Jai Jinendra. Let's start with today's class. It's a same topic, but different great men that we are going to talk about today. It's Sri Kalikacharya. We'll go into the details of this particular story today, but there will be a couple of other stories on the same by the same name, the next two lessons. Okay. Let me start my slides. We'll start with the prayers. Namo Orientanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Udzayanam, Namo Loe Sabba Sahunam, Eso Panchanamukkaro Sabba Pavapanasano Mangalanancha Sabvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. Namo Orientanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Udzayanam, Namo Loe Sabba Sahunam, Eso Panchanamukkaro Sabba Pavapanasano Mangalanancha Sabvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Udzayanam, Namo Loe Sabba Sahunam, Eso Panchanamukka Sabba Pavapanasano Mangalanancha Sabvesim Parvam Havai Mangalam. Veera Sarasura Surendra Mahito Viramuda Sanskrita Virana Vyata Swakarmanichayo Viraya Nityam Nama Veera Tirthamidam Protamatalam Virashighoram Tapo Veera Sri Dhruti Kirtikantinichaya Sri Veerabhadram Visa कमठे द्रणेन्द्र च सुचितं कर्म कुर्वति प्रभुस्तुल्य मनोवृत्ति पार्श्वनाथ श्रीस्तु वः अंगूठे अमृत वसे लपति तड़ा भंडार श्री गुरु गौतम समरिये मनवांछित फलदातार. That's the format of our talk and what we aim to gain from this. Start with the Sajai as we normally recite. परेशर बाहुबली अभय कुमारो ढनन कुमारो सिरियोणि आउतो इमुतो नागदत्तो मेजथुली बद्दो वैर ऋषि नंदी सेण सिंहगिरी कैवन्नो कुशल पुंडरियो के शिखर कंडु हल वियल सुदर्शन साल महासाल साली बद्दो बद्दो दसर बद्दो पसन चंदो जस बद्दो जम्बू pohु वंकचुलो गई सुकुमालो अवंति सुकुमालो तन्नो इलाई पुत्तो चिलाई पुत्तो बाहुमणि अजगिरी अज रखिय अज सुअथि उदाय गो मणगो काले सुरी संभो पज्जुनो मूल देवो. The person we are going to talk about today comes in this particular verse. Ajgiri ajrakhiya ajsuati udayago manago kale suri sambho pajjuno mula devo paba o vinahu kumaro ad kumaro dad pahariya jens kurugaddu sinambhava meh kumaro emai mahasatta dintu suham gungane him sanjuta jesim nam gahane pav vanda vijayan janti सुलसा चंदन बाला मनोरमा मयण रेहा दमयंती नमया सुंदरी सिया नंदा बदा सुगताय राय में ऋषि दत्ता पौमावई अंजना ऋषि देवी जिठ सुजिठ मिगावई पपावई चलना देवी बंबी सुंदरी रूपिणी रेवई कुंती शिवा जयंती आ देवई दोई धारिणी कलावई पुफचुलाय पौमावई गोरी गांधारी लक्ष्मणा सुसीमाय जम्बू वई सच बामा रूपिणी कणहठ महिषियो चखा य चखदीना भूत जे भूदिनाय सेना वेणा रेणा भेणियो थुली बद्दस इच्छाई महासयो जयंती अकलंक सील कलियाओ अजवी वज्जे इजासिम जस पढ़ो तिहोणे सेले. I won't go into the details of these slides now, as you've already seen them a few times. We are reciting the names of, or we are listening to the stories of the great men and women who remembered in this Sajjai. And today we are going to talk about somebody called Kalikacharya or Kalakacharya. Last week we talked about the great Bhadrabhahu Swami, the last the last person with the knowledge of 14 Purvas, and we learned about the origins of Uvasagaram Stotra. Now, we're going to continue this particular topic over 3 lessons. Because there are 3 different Acharya Bhagwans with the name of Kalikacharya. Today, we are going to listen to the story of one of them. And during the following 2 Tuesday classes, we'll listen to the stories of the other 2. The first Kalikacharya whose story we will hear today, excuse my spelling mistakes here, had to temporarily give up his monkhood and become a warrior to save his sister Sadhviji, who had been abducted by a king Gardbil of Ujjain. Now, the story starts with the country of Magad, in which there was a city-state of Dharwas, and there was a king called Vajra Singh and his queen Sursundari. They had 2 children, one boy called Kalak or Kalak and a girl called Saraswati. They both grew up with great upbringing, and they were all they were both very well versed with the culture and the religion. And once Kalak has an occasion to visit and listen to the sermon of an Acharya Gunadhar, and after listening to his sermon, he gets very detached from worldly life and decides to become a monk. And both him and his sister, with the permission of their parents, take up the vows of a Jain monk and a nun. So both Kalak and his sister gave up their worldly life and became ascetics. Over a period of time, Kalak Muni progresses in his sadhana and is granted the position of an acharya, and he becomes quite a prominent acharya in the Jain Sangh at the time. And their life as ascetics is going on quite well. But once, as we know, that Muni Bhagwans or monks and nuns in the Jain order do not stay in one place, and they are moving from place to place. And once they come outside the city of Ujjain and are going to stay there for some time, once while they are just outside Ujjain, Sadhvi Saraswati has occasion to a city and was walking through the city of Ujjain when the king of that particular city state, King Gardbil, who was taking a stroll, saw the exceptionally beautiful Sadhvi and had her abducted and taken to his palace. He was so attracted to the Sadhviji Maharaj, even in her garb as a Sadhviji. She was extremely beautiful, and this king had evil intentions, and he abducts her and sends her to his palace. When Kalikacharya, who was Sadhviji Saraswati's brother, hears about this, he sends this Jain Sangh of the city to the palace to urge the king Gardbil to release Sadhvi Saraswati. And the Sangh uses all their powers of persuasion and tries to reason with the king that this is a wrongful act and that the king should not have done this. But the king refuses to budge, and he's adamant that he will keep Sadhvi Saraswati in his palace as one of the women in his palace as a wife. Kalikacharya himself then goes to the king's court to convince the king to release the Sadhviji. He tries to explain to the king his moral duties and do the right thing, but the king does not budge. Now, a lot of effort has been spent here. I've just mentioned it in brief, but behind such an occasion and how do you reduce the harm as a result of this abduction, there's a lot that has been tried. And when nothing seems to work, Kalikacharya carefully considers what he can do, and he sees no other option to free Sadhvi Saraswati but to take up arms himself. He was a prince and he was trained in the arts of a warrior, and he has the means in his personal upbringing and his personal skills. However, he does not have an army to fight a king. So he sees no other option but to start preparing to get some support for an army to attack King Ujjain, the king of Ujjain, and to get the Sadhvi Saraswati released. Kalikacharya discards his robes as a Muni, dresses up as a warrior, instructs the Sangh on some essential issues, and goes forth to seek support of other kings to help him fight King Gardbil. Now, as a very prominent acharya, as somebody who's very learned, who's somebody who's also got the background of a prince and the skills of a warrior, he impresses one of the Sak kings. So there were several Sak kings in lands which were not considered to be very civilized, just outside the main areas of Bharat. Uh, the word that is used to describe this was Malech. And in the Malech kingdoms, there were several Sak kings, and he receives a commitment from them to help him when needed. So he prepares them, explains to them what uh, help he might need, and gets that commitment from them. And once one of the Sak kings has a particularly difficult situation, one of the other Sak kings sends him a knife and a bowl, and this puts this king in great difficulty. It's an omen of an instruction, basically, which says that you have to kill yourself and send me blood on your head. So somebody is basically threatening this king, and this other person is another Sak king. So this Sak king is in difficulties. He asks Kalikacharya, who is now in the garb of a warrior, and asks his help. So Kalikacharya says that, don't worry, let me try and help you gain another kingdom and lead you with your armies to the borders of Ujjain, and I will help you from this, but this will help you from this particular situation. And following their embarkation on this particular journey of conquest, they run into other difficulties through which Kalikacharya, with the use of his some special powers, helps them, uh, the army, to overcome this difficulty. And then they carry on and arrive at the outskirts of the city-state of Ujjain, which, as in those times, had a huge uh, wall around the city, uh, like the walls that we see outside castles. So the army arrives there, and Kalikacharya sends a message to Gardbil that please release Sadhviji Saraswati now if you want to avoid further escalation of this. And if you don't, he sends him a warning, then you are certainly going to face death. King Gadbil is very proud, and he is adamant on pursuing his evil intentions, and he does not accept this proposition and prepares for war and starts preparation to use his one particular power that he had, which was called Gardabi Vidya. Uh, Vidyas, as are described in Jain texts, are special powers that are given by Devis, who are called Vidya Devis, and they have their particular expertise. And as a result of some sadhana that a person can do, the Devis would grant them particular Vidyas or boons. And this Gardbil prepares to launch this particular power. And as he's starting to prepare this, Kalikacharya is preparing his army to counteract this special power. He knows what this particular Gadbi Vidya that Gadbil king has got in his control will do. Basically, this Vidya would allow the Devi would shout out extremely loud, harming sounds, which would which had the power of killing anybody who heard them, and king and decimate whole armies. So Kalikacharya warns the army that we have to make efforts to ensure that he does not get to use this particular vidya, and he prepares quite a few. The number that is quoted here in the story is 108 different bowmen, and he says before there is any preparation of uh, launching this particular vidya to destroy us, I want all of us to fill the king's mouth with arrows so that he can just not speak, and that will ensure that the vidya will turn against him and kill him. King Gardpil is defeated and is killed by his own special power as a result of this particular initiative by Kalikacharya. And Kalikacharya then distributes the various kingdoms under Gardbil's control to the different Saksings who had all sort of come together to help him. Following this, he then resumes his life as a monk after he has done penance for his deviation from his vows. And the Acharya conducts his monkhood purely, and at the end of his life, his soul is born as a Dev. His sister Sadhvi Saraswati, who had remained pure because King Gardbil did not have the he did not have an occasion to molest her because of her strength as well. And she carries on as the life of a monk, and her soul is also born in a Devlok after that. Now, this Kalikacharya is one of the three different Kalikacharyas, all of whom had done some great deed in their lives. The particular importance of this story is a Jain monk who has taken the vow of not harming any living thing, any living being, and to lead a life of complete ahimsa, has had to take up arms, be ready to lead an army, and to fight a war. And he had to do this to save the virtue of Sadhviji Maharaj. And at that time, he could not get the help of anybody else because of the power of this Gardbil. He goes out and seeks help from other kings from a different region and uses his power to defeat this king. But he has taken this particular step as an exception. So in terms of understanding and of debate, when a question is asked, what does one do when there is a situation when the whole Sangha and the whole way of life and the principles of dharma are threatened, then as in this particular case, the great Acharya had taken an exception, and as an Acharya, he had the ability to understand the principles of the Shastras and to understand when an exception is valid, and he had taken this particular route as an exception to ensure that the Sadhviji Maharaj was protected. Now, this particular incident talks about exceptions to the rule, but also more importantly talks about who can actually make a decision about exception. So currently there we hear about a lot of debate about people saying that we should modify the principles of modify the uh, way of interpreting the dictum of the Shastras based on the times that we are living in, and that there should be some freedom that is appropriate for the times in which we are living. But the only people who can understand the complexities of the Shastras to come to a position where an exception may be necessary or right would be great, very well versed Acharya Maharaj, who have very great in-depth knowledge of the Shastras. Most of us who uh, do not have that background, and even most acharyas would not have that background to be able to take this position of exceptions. And people using this particular example as a means of modifying the principles would be in very uncertain grounds and would be taking a great step that might actually cause much more harm. This particular story and the other stories about the other two Kalikacharyas also focus in this particular theme, and or one of them actually focuses on this particular theme. And that is why Kalikacharya is remembered. This particular story is much more commonly known. The other two stories that we'll talk about, one of them next week and the final one week after next, will also illustrate some other aspects of a similar situation. So I've rushed through this story. There are a few other details within the story that may be interesting as well, but that requires a detailed discussion of other things that we wouldn't have the time to go into, and it requires an understanding of different vidyas. This particular different, so it makes mention of this particular Gardhavil Vidya. In this text that I was referring to, there isn't much detail, but there are other versions where I've read some details of the Gardhavil Vidya and the other Vidya that Kalikacharya actually uses to counteract this. And there is an incident that is described in this particular text as well, where he uses special powers to help the Sak kings to get to a position to help him defend and supply him with the army. So there again, there is another Vidya that is being used, but we are not going into the details of all that. But what I'd like to do now is ask you to ponder over this and see if anybody has got any questions. So the crux of the story, really, to revise, is that we are celebrating an Acharya who took an exception, gave up his vows temporarily, took up arms, led an army to fight a war, to defend, and to get Sadhviji Maharaj, his sister, from the worldly life, Saraswati, released from a powerful king who had abducted her. So, any questions? I will stop sharing here.
if you have any questions, please raise your hands and then we can take them in turns.
We probably finished a bit early. I've rushed through the story, but there is plenty to think about in the short version. And if you've not understood any part of it, please feel free to ask. Did the story surprise you? Let me ask you the question. And if it did, what part of the story surprised you? Raise your hands. Nilma. Yeah, go on.
Actually, what surprised me, because my understanding up until now was that once somebody has taken Diksha, no matter what, they cannot actually give up their Diksha and come back to worldly life. And this, I'm assuming we're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago. And nobody ever talks about there are some exceptions in Diksha.
So,
Or perhaps I'm not aware of it.
yeah, no, there are stories of several people. I mean, within the, I think this happened probably quite some time after Bhagwan Mahavir. So it's not that long ago. That's my understanding. But there are stories of other people around the time of Bhagwan Mahavir who have had occasion to give up their Diksha, not because of such a great need, but because of their personal circumstances or their personal fall from grace, as so to speak, from their vows. So we know about Ardra Muni, who gave up life as a monk to go back and marry somebody, lived as a householder for many years, had a son, and then gave up his worldly life again and became a proper monk under the auspices of Bhagwan Mahavir and gained Keval Gyan Nirvana after that. We also have heard of the story of Nandi Sen Muni, who was a king, who was the son of King Shrenik, and he was a prince, even though he had been warned not to become a monk because he still had a worldly life to lead, and the fact that he had Bhogavali karma, meaning that he was destined to enjoy sensual pleasures and he could not escape from that, but he was so desirous of becoming a monk that he ignores that advice, he becomes a monk, and then there comes an occasion when he gets attracted to a Vaishya, a prostitute, and then sets up a home with her for many, many years. But that story itself is very exceptional and inspirational as to exactly what he does, even in his life as a householder with this prostitute that he's living with, and what he does for many, many years. That is an exceptional demonstration of great ability of life-changing sermons from somebody sitting in such a place, the house of a prostitute. So there have been examples like that, but in modern times, there have been exceptions that you have probably heard of. But here, this particular story is relevant and important because the exception was taken deliberately for the purpose of protecting another Sadhviji Maharaj. And with great deliberation, with great thought, and the decision was taken not for a personal reason, but for the reason of protecting the Sangh. So in terms of the process behind this particular decision, if we you'd need a lot more learned person than me to debate the ins and outs of the thinking that might have gone behind and the Shastriya reasoning behind this. So a great Acharya or Upadhyaya Maharaj would be able to explain this in more detail. I've covered it very briefly, and this is how it's remembered briefly in the translation of Baresar Sajjai. But yes, you're right. That is surprising.
So, Ajit Bhai, based on that,
Mhm.
just the question I have in my head
Mhm.
that at our current time, none of our Maharaj Sahib would travel out, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, there are some unfortunate children who probably living abroad, maybe in UK, who have never seen Maharaj Sahib, who
Mm.
doesn't really know much about the Maharaj Sahib life.
Mm.
So, isn't that an exceptional circumstances for them too? Because now we've moved out and we've gone out in the world to keep our dharma going, to keep everything going. Should they not be some exception there?
So, Nilaven, the exception with respect to the benefit of some individuals. So there are alternatives in the sense that we have people who are learned who travel and who are householders who travel. So you had people from Tapovan coming, we've got other scholars. Currently, we've got somebody who is actually who used to be a monk before, Nirmal Sagarji, who is now a householder, who lives in Hong Kong, is currently here with the Pratishta. So there are exceptions, but a monk who has taken the vows of not traveling, of following all the 5 great vows, the benefit of traveling outside, from our angle, it may seem as if that there is a benefit for us, but any exception needs a balance of the cost benefit ratio, and in most instances the harm that could be done and the cost of making these exceptions is usually in the favor of it being too costly or not the right thing to do. Now, from our point of view, and I've heard this argument many times over the years, that would be of great benefit to the religion. But if you look at it from an Acharya Bhagwan's and the Sadhu Bhagwan's point of view, making exception to your vows for the purpose of preaching with uncertain outcomes to people who may or may not be ready, and then trying to understand the greater good over the next few years of this, the balance generally comes down to it being more harmful than beneficial. And that is my understanding. And most Acharya Maharajas take some exception to some of the rules, but any exceptions are considered extremely carefully. We mustn't forget that the rules of our dharma were propounded by somebody who is Kevad Gnani, meaning having total knowledge of the past, present, and the future. And in their knowledge, they would have understood everything that would happen to us at this time. And those rules were set for the times of Bhagwan Mahavir, so Panch Mahavrat, so for example, during the times of Bhagwan Parshanath, and from the second Tirthankar, Bhagwan Ajitnath to Bhagwan Parshanath, the monks had 4 vows, where the intent of all the 5 vows was encompassed in the 4 vows. In the times of Bhagwan Rushabdev and Bhagwan Mahavir, in these times, we have 5 vows. So that was the change. But beyond that, exceptions have been made by great acharyas sometime or the other, but those are rare and those are taken with extreme care. And this particular incident that we may think would be of benefit would not generally be considered to be valuable enough to make an exception to a vow like this.
Thank you.
Because our limited understanding and knowledge, it can be quite difficult because we are not looking at the whole wide picture of what is involved with the life of Muni Bhagwant and what the value of their vows are to their personal development. So their primary duty is to themselves. The primary duty is to make all the effort to emancipate their life, their souls, to reach moksha as quickly as possible, or to prepare the ground so that in their next few lives they are getting to moksha. And that is the greater good. If they make an exception to that at the expense of their own spiritual progress, to try and get more of us to understand religion, the harm that is done to them may be much greater, and ultimately, as a result of that, the harm that may come to us because of that kind of association may be difficult.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Bharat bhai?
Yeah.
You raised
Jai Jayendra,
Tejendra.
Ajit bhai.
Ah.
On the question of Kalikacharya taking up arms, I mean, living monkhood and taking up arms to fight the king, he must have taken consent from his guru. I mean,
Yes.
that could have been one of the scenarios, because I mean, anything he would do would not be without the consent of his guru.
No. And it would have been with great consideration, with debate with the Sangh as well.
Yes.
And with so before he leaves, I made a statement there from the version that I've read. He says he gives some specific instructions to the Sangh before he hands over his clothes as a monk to the other sadhus to hold for him, takes up the robes of a warrior and goes out to seek. There is a more detailed version of this story that I've read many years ago. And then I'm sure still a lot of our acharyas know the full version of this story. So there is a lot more to this. So, I mean, I've covered this in short, but the background and all that it needs to be understood.
And I'm sure that once he became a monk again, he must have gone through penance to,
Absolutely, yeah. So I've used that here.
Yeah.
That he takes penance having broken his vows.
Well,
So the penance would be an absolute essential. So એનું પ્રાયશ્ચિત કરી અને પછી એમણે એનું જીવન શરૂ કર્યું. એટલે આ જે કર્યું છે એનું તો પ્રાયશ્ચિત હોય જ ડેફિનેટલી. અને એણે લીધું ત્યારે દુઃખથી જ કે આના સિવાય કોઈ છૂટકો જ નથી. આ કરવું છે, આ કરવું પડશે, અને આ કરવા માટે આ જે નુકસાન છે સંઘને આ ન કરીએ તો એ નુકસાન બહુ મોટું છે. અને એમાં એક્સેપ્શન લઈ અને આ રીતે એની સાથે લડાઈ કરવી એ જરૂરિયાત છે એ નક્કી કરી પોતાનું સાધુપણું મૂકી અને આ કર્યું, પણ કરવા છતાંય કે મેં આ કર્યું તું, મેં મનમાં that I had the thoughts of violence, mentally had broken my vow, went this far as to create an army, all that required penance. Yeah, I've done wrong, but that wrong was necessary
Exactly.
to support a greater good, to make sure that all the monks, nuns were considered to be safe and they had the protection. So nobody else in the future would dare
To
to actually think that these people are non-violent and that they will not defend themselves. So you can do anything you like to them and you can molest their the Sadhviji Maharaj or anybody else any way you like. And there are examples of how monks have been got put into great difficulty by many different kings for various reasons. But this particular exception where an Acharya Maharaj took up arms is quoted as a means of defending. And then Kalakacharya wasn't a weak person. He had great powers as well. And even though this Bill had powers, he devises a way of defeating him and was completely prepared to fight a war. So he had made, and the skill with which he actually approaches this Sakh kings, and there were many Sakh kings at the time, and he gets their promise, and the detail is not in there, but to have convinced them to support him, that did require a lot of diplomatic and political skills. So somebody who had become a monk to the level of an acharya goes back, uses his skills as a negotiator in a completely different sphere to that level, not an ordinary level. He is approaching Malech kings. Malech means those who are not
the
very
low caste.
civilized. Yes, they are not very civilized. So
Mm.
he approaches them and he convinces them to support him. And it wouldn't have been just with words. He would have promised things, he would have shown his powers, and he did, in this particular example, did show them his powers by creating great wealth for them when they needed it. So he uses his powers to support all that. So I mean, I've covered it in short, but the background to this is quite a lot. And I wanted you all to think about it, but I know we can't complete a lot of the details of the stories in a short time, unfortunately. Okay, we got two hands, Ashwin and
Sorry,
Darshan.
last I just got one more point to make.
Yeah.
I'll make it quick. The
Yeah.
fact that Kalikacharya defends Sadhviji's, from being molested by the king in itself is dharma, because
It is dharma.
if we see, if we when we say સાધનાના ચાર પ્રકાર છે, એમાંથી પેલા જેમ આપણે we've covered it on the Wednesday class. The first one is like ત્યાગ dharma. ત્યાગ dharma is દાન, શીલ, તપ અને ભાવ.
Yeah.
I mean, here he protects the shield
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
the Sadhviji, because the Sadhviji, she's not capable of defending herself.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
in a way, that is dharma, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of defense, but here the argument arises, can you break a vow? People find it difficult to understand, but the bigger debate is the thoughts behind coming to this conclusion and the position and the great knowledge of the Shastras, and to understand where and when you apply an exception and to what extent you apply the exception and what you do within that exception once you have taken that path and what do you do afterwards, those are all the very important aspects of this. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that simple exceptions should be allowed because of the changing times. The question and the answer are never that simple.
Those gray areas are very complicated for us to
Very
understand.
complicated, and for most of us. So us thinking that we should be making exceptions is actually a fallacy because you don't understand the depth of this. Ashwin Bhai?
Thank you, Ajit.
Yeah, Jinendra. My question is, did Kalki become a warrior to save his sister, or was it to save a sadhvi? I mean, if she hadn't been his sister, would he have done the same?
Absolutely. If he was there, she was his sister, no doubt. She was in danger. Any other sadhvi, I mean, Saraswati Sadhviji was exceptionally beautiful. So there was, and in this particular country, this sad incident did happen. The king abducted her, but her virtue remained intact. That's my understanding. But whoever it was, they would have done that because Kalikacharya, if that was within the sangh that he was in and he would have known about that, there's no doubt in my mind that they would have taken exactly the same steps.
Thank you.
Okay. Darshana Ben?
My question is more a question. Does this not raise a question of right and wrong, and how does one determine what is right? Because what's right to you may not be right to someone else.
So the background of a Jain Acharya, having attained that position, having digested the knowledge of the Shastras, being very learned, and to understand the wider context of the society they were living in and the wider context of the consequences of a particular incident and a particular reaction to that incident, as you just described, requires a great deal of thought. So the final conclusion and the final path taken is based on the worth of the decision, balance of what is going to be of value and the harm that it might do. And when the value is significantly exceeded compared with the harm that might be done, it's only then when such decisions are taken. So it is difficult for us to understand. And what I would urge all of us to ensure is that we don't consider sort of statements like, oh, we should be changing things, because changing things from our very, very limited knowledge and suggesting that is in itself a very precarious and a very dangerous position. These exceptions were taken by somebody with great knowledge, great conduct. So an Acharya Bhagwant is the master of a good conduct of a sadhu Bhagwant. Acharma Ucha che, Acharya is leading a whole large group of other monks and nuns and other people at the level of maybe even acharyas, but also upadhyayas, so sadhus, sadhvis. They are also the leaders of shravaks and shravikas, and they have great knowledge and they have the skill to navigate such difficult situations. Most of us wouldn't. And then if we thought that we had the skills with our limited knowledge and thought that we should, great harm has come to people and to situations because somebody's pride dictates that I can actually make any changes I want.
And one more question, sorry, Ajit Bhai.
Yeah.
Would you be able to go through like the hierarchy of, so we just touched on Acharya and Sadhvis, like who's higher, and would you be able to explain that, please?
Then there are Acharya Bhagwant, then the Gach in which they are part, you got Gach Adhipati, he is a senior Acharya, the senior most monk, Gachadipati. There are several Acharyas underneath them, and each Acharya has other Upadhyayas under them. So when we say Naukar Mantra, Namo Ayaryanam, we are bowing down to the Acharyas. Namo Uvadzayanam, we are bowing down to the Upadhyayas or Panyasji. Then Namo Loya Sabva Sahunam, all the sadhus and the Sadhuji Bhagwants. So the hierarchy is Acharya, Upadhyay, Sadhu, and Acharya Mai is part of the group. There is Gachadipati. So that is the hierarchy.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I hope this was useful, and I'm glad that you're all thinking through some of these things. The two other Kalikacharyas that we'll talk about next week will also give us a room for thought, and we will resume our class next week. Okay. And I hope to see some of you at the Jain Center Mahotsav, Pratishtha Mahotsav, over the next few days. If I've said anything that is against the teachings of great Tirthankar Bhagwans, or Guru Maharaj, and the Dharma, I say Michhami Dukudam. जिन वचन विरोध काई पण बोलायो के वायु विचारो ते सभी मन वचन काय करे तस्मिच्छामि दुक्कडम सर्वमंगल मांगल्यम सर्वकल्याण कारणम प्रधानम सर्वधर्माणाम जैनम जयति शासनम. Thank you.
Pranam Ajit Bhai, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Jai Jinendra.
Abhi, I'll log off now. It's okay.